Here we go on the Ole Miss full epoxy inlay rack header. This is an epoxy backer with a full epoxy inlay logo. I'm going to walk you through my process from start to finish to show you how we did it. So you can see here we're starting with a MDF blank. We've done a pocket at 0.08 inches deep. And then we've done a profile toolpath that goes almost all the way through the material. We're coming down, this is 3/4 inch material. We're bringing this down to just about 0.71 inches deep. So we're going pretty much all the way through, and you'll see why at the end, why that's important. So first we're gonna go ahead and start with painting a gray base coat. All right, here we go on the rack header. Obviously we've got it painted, we've got the groove, the border groove cut, we have our epoxy mixed. According to the epoxy inlay calculator, this called for 15.75 ounces. I went ahead and just mixed just about 16 and a half or so. Pour it on, get it in there. It'll self-level. This stuff is actually not tabletop. This is, what do you call it? Epoxy. Really quick, if you follow the epoxy inlay calculator and use that tool to figure out how much epoxy you need, you're not going to have to play any guesswork about how much should I mix, how much goes in here, how much goes in there. It does all the work for you, so you can just mix that amount of ounces, pour it in, and you're good to go. It out. So we're kind of doing an experiment. I say we're kind of doing an experiment here because I typically will use Promise Epoxy tabletop epoxy for this part of the process. But here I wanted to try Epoxy to see how it worked. It ended up not working as well as I had hoped it would. So in the future, I'm definitely going to continue to use that Promise Epoxy tabletop epoxy for this part of the process. And this part of the process I consider your background color. You're giving whatever the size or whatever the shape of your sign is that nice background. It's going to take care of the edges as well. You're going to have edges that are going to be the same color epoxy as the face of it. It just looks really, really clean, really, really polished and finished when it's all done. So again, like I said in the video, it was a little bit of an experiment here, trying out the Epoxy epoxy. I wasn't happy with how it worked. It actually ended up, because it's thinner, it ended up running a little bit more than the tabletop does from Promise. And I ended up having to flatten it and then do another base coat of tabletop epoxy on top of it. So you'll see in the video here shortly where I flatten it and do it again, just because it didn't turn out the way I wanted it to. And Promise Epoxy. So your table being level is especially crucial here. All right. We are completely covered. Excellent. All right. All right, at this point, we're gonna let it sit for about 45 minutes. Come back, we'll put the swirls in it, and then we'll be good to go. So you can see here how the epoxy ran a little bit more. It's kind of sunken down around the border. I typically don't have that with the Promise Epoxy. So just an example of why I'm not going to be using Epoxy for this part of the process anymore. All right, so this is how we're putting swirls in. It's just a really small flathead screwdriver. Sometimes I'll use a pick with a really fine point, and other times when I'm doing larger areas like this, I'll use the flathead screwdriver. And it does a really nice job. You can see them bubbles just showing up and popping all on their own. That is what I like about Epoxy. Now here you can see I am flattening with a 3/8 bit. Typically this is not needed. However, because I said I'm not happy with how the Epoxy laid out, I decided to go back. We're going to take off about 0.08 or so. I can't remember exactly, and we're just going to start over. So you can see here we're got that pocket totally cut out, and we're just applying the Promise Epoxy, following the epoxy inlay calculator, figure out how much epoxy we actually need, spread it around, make sure it's fully coated. That is the nice thing about the Promise Epoxy, the fact that it's a little bit thicker than the Epoxy. Sometimes, in this particular case, it's a little bit easier to use. And the other cool thing with the Promise Epoxy is you can put your swirls in right away when you do a surface coat. Not so if you're filling a pocket, but if you're just doing a surface coat, you can put those swirls in and then they typically will stay. Once that's cured, we can go ahead and start cutting the first colors of our elements. We're going to be doing a white background here, and then after that, we're going to go ahead and cut the rest of the elements inside that white background that we're doing. So this is going to be considered a background epoxy inlay. All right, we got our white pocket cut. Oh miss. According to the epoxy calculator, it was 4.4 ounces, just about 4 ounces. So I got about 4 ounces here. I have been really enjoying using the calculator on live jobs because it's less thinking, less guesswork. That's a little low, but I want to get some in this first. I could have calculated each individually since these are two separate pockets, but I just put them together. Add them together. Basically no waste. So at this part of the process, you'll just follow the steps for the rest of doing an epoxy background inlay that we lay out in the masterclass to get all your colors cut and filled and flattened. And then this step here, it's not typical. However, for this application, these headers do need to be somewhat thin. So I ran this through the bandsaw so that I could essentially cut it in half. I could have started with some thinner material. However, you always run the risk of the epoxy warping, especially once it gets in cold temperatures. It likes to tighten up a little bit. So I like to start thick and then I work my way thin if I need to cut it down to make it thin. Like I said, this particular product that we sell, it has to be a little bit thin because it doesn't look right when it's super thick. So this is just kind of a last step thing that we do as part of the process to cut it down so that it sits a little bit closer to the bagger that it gets mounted to. Once you've got it cut out, you can follow the cleaning and preparation steps that we outlined in the Epoxy Inlay Masterclass to get it ready for the top coat of clear. Wipe it down with some 91% or higher isopropyl alcohol, set it up, mix your tabletop epoxy, and just pour that stuff right on. And then once it cures, come back in a day or two. I typically like to wait 2 days. Come back, flip it over, sand the stuff off the bottom, sand the drips off the bottom, and you're good to go. For these ones that we do have holes that have to get milled out after the fact because the epoxy does kind of fill in those holes. So we drill those holes out so that the hardware will fit nice and easy for the customer, and then they get a nice, beautiful, finished epoxy inlay rag header.